Chapter 7. The Gift of Harmlessness. If all the insects on Earth disappeared, within 50 years all life on Earth would disappear. If all humans disappeared, within 50 years all species would flourish as never before, says Jonas Salk. I visited all quarters with my mind, nor found I any dearer than myself. Self is likewise to every other dear. Who loves himself may never harm another, says the Buddha. Tse Kung asked, is there one word that can serve as a principle of conduct for life? Confucius replied, it is the word shu, meaning reciprocity. Do not impose on others what you yourself do not desire. The highest realms of thought are impossible to reach without first attaining an understanding of compassion, says Socrates. At the corner of non-violence stands the principle of love, says Martin Luther King Jr. If we practice an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, soon the whole world will be blind and toothless, says Mahatma Gandhi. Harming neither by thought, word, nor deed. At its core, the gift of harmlessness represents honoring and celebrating the preciousness of life and signifies non-harming by thought, word, and deed. When we understand that a harm done to others is essentially a harm done to ourselves, since there are no others, we have understood the real import of harmlessness. It is true that the very process of living involves a certain amount of violence, and that it is perhaps not possible to eliminate violence completely. What we have to do is to seek to minimize its extent as much as possible. Only then we can truly claim our heritage as evolved beings. Thomas Edison put it well. Non-violence leads to the highest ethics, which is the goal of all evolution. Until we stop harming all other living beings, we are still savages. However, it must start with us, one person at a time. Harmlessness, like charity, also begins at home. Dalai Lama said, the atmosphere of peace must first be created within ourselves, then gradually expanded to include our families, our communities, and ultimately the whole planet. Psychology of violence. There are 4 primary reasons that prod people to violence. The first reason seems to be ignorance. The person causing the harm is not aware that his or her actions are causing harm to others. Most mental harm takes place when the person supposedly causing such harm is ignorant of the real impact of his or her actions. This brings us to the second cause of violence, that is, insensitivity. Most religious violence emanates from a certain lack of sensitivity toward other people's belief system. Developing empathy and understanding can go a long in addressing such violence. Developing empathy and understanding can go a long way in addressing such violence. The third reason for violence is anger, and the fourth is hatred. Unaddressed anger leads to hatred. Both anger and hatred are responsible for most of the harm done in the world. Cultivating compassion through understanding seems to be the best antidote to violence born out of anger and hatred. If we carefully look at the psychology behind these 4 causes of violence, we discover that they all emanate from a common factor of self-centeredness. It is a direct cause of insensitivity toward others and the operative cause of anger leading to hatred. Developing patience, understanding, kindness, and compassion can go a long way in dealing with violence at the personal as well as global level. Forget everything. Remember your humanity. Russell's enjoinder to be mindful of our humanity can help us avoid an all too common source of conflict. Russell's enjoinder to be mindful of our humanity can help us avoid an all too common source of conflict. When asked who we are, mostly we find ourselves answering this question by stating our profession, nationality, culture, race, or gender. Some of us even like to be known by our particular political, social, cultural, or organizational affiliation or orientation. Who are we, really? Are we nothing more than our nationality, profession, race, culture, or orientation? Is that all? Aren't these identifiers rather incidental and accidental, and thus secondary at best? Most of these frames of reference have to do with where we are born and raised, over which we have no choice or control at all. Our birth is a biological or geographical accident, so to speak. Very often, such identifiers lead to artificial differences and divisions. We know from experience that everything that divides creates conflict. This is rather a disempowering position to operate from. Dalai Lama's observation is quite enlightening in this regard. Before I am a monk, I am a Tibetan. And before I am a Tibetan, I am a human being. This is an empowering stance to live by, a great cosmic joke. We're all the same. We think we are different, says Peter Vale. If we reflect deeply on who we are, we will find more commonalities than differences among us. I recall an interesting encounter with Julius Schulman that underscores this important point. Among my meetings with remarkable people, my encounter with Mr. Julius Schulman, the great architectural photographer, has a special significance. He had recently donated a portfolio of 60,000 images to the Getty Museum. He was 95 at that time and had only few more months to live. His body was frail, but his mind was still solid. It was quite impressive to hear his progressive views on sustainable housing, world peace, and mesmerizing photography. Then in the middle of the conversation, Mr. Schulman paused and asked me, "So what is the difference between you and me?" I do not know what possessed me at that time, but without even thinking much about the question, I replied, "Nothing." He asked me, "How so?" Without missing a beat, I said, "Because we both have problems." Mr. Schulman burst into laughter and extended his hand again and said, "Now we can truly be friends." Who loves himself should never harm another. Our self is the most dear to us of all. It comes as a natural endowment that perhaps has its roots in the instinct of self-preservation. An important verse in one of the ancient Hindu wisdom texts, or Upanishads, states that it is not for the sake of husband, wife, son, or any other beings that one loves, but for one's own sake. However, in our bid to get our self-interest across, we often tend to forget the simple fact that likewise, everyone's self is also most dear to him or her. According to the teachings of the Buddha, every creature holds itself most dear of all. Every being wants to live and thrive. Live and let live. The ideal of harmlessness finds a great parallel in the Sanskrit word ahimsa. The word is derived from the Sanskrit root himsa, meaning injury. Ahimsa, therefore, means non-injury or non-harming, or simply non-violence. Ahimsa, as a Hindu and Buddhist principle, represents a belief in the sacredness of all life that signifies non-injury in thought, word, and deed. The ultimate purpose of practicing non-violence is to lessen the overall suffering in the world by fostering peace and harmony. In his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth, Gandhi has stated that the phrase passive resistance, then current in Europe, was too narrowly conceived. It could be interpreted as a cover for cowardice, or else it could be disguised hatred and could finally manifest itself as violence. Gandhi believed that mere non-retaliation without love and compassion toward the attacker was not true ahimsa. For Gandhi, ahimsa signified universal love and an indirect means to the spiritual end of realization of the ultimate truth. This is why he called his peaceful movement satyagraha, meaning firmness in the abode of truth. According to Gandhi, non-violence is not a weapon of the weak, but it is the supreme virtue of the brave. For him, the practice of non-violence required far greater bravery than that of swordsmanship. As a principle, it is far more profound than a simple injunction to cause no physical harm. In its original meaning, it denotes dynamic peacefulness that undergirds our essential mutuality with one another and with rest of the existence. It is important to remember that in Gandhi's life, non-violence did not just mean causing no harm. Rather, it permeated his whole character and emanated from his deeper being as a positive force to help others in the most natural ways. Mahatma Gandhi's cardinal principle of non-violence or ahimsa was a true expression of this gift. It emanated from a deep conviction about the essential oneness of all life and served as a true north orientation in the life of that great leader. It sustained him well during India's long struggle for its independence. Per his own acknowledgement, he learned it from his readings of Tolstoy, the Bible, and the Bhagavad Gita. Gandhi believed that ahimsa without compassion is worthless. Ahimsa should begin in self-discipline and must end in love and compassion. So, harmlessness does not simply entail not doing harm, it also occasions doing good through loving kindness and compassion. This principle also later inspired a host of other moral leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Nelson Mandela. The following story illustrates the power of Gandhi's gentle being and shows that doing good came to him naturally. My life is my message. Once Gandhi was boarding a train and a journalist stopped him in the doorway to ask him some questions. As he was finishing his interview, the train started to take off very slowly. The journalist got off the train and started walking along with the slowly moving train, trying to ask his last set of questions. He finally asked Gandhi, "What is your message?" Gandhi simply replied, "My life is my message." As Gandhi was leaving the doorway of the train, one of his sandals slipped from his foot and landed near the railway track. Suddenly the train began pulling away quickly, leaving him no time to retrieve it. Immediately, Gandhi removed the other sandal and tossed it back to lie with the other along the track. When his astonished fellow passenger asked, "Why did he do this?" Gandhi replied, "Now the poor man who finds it will have a pair he can use." Reverence for life. Deeply influenced by Indian religious thought, especially the principle of non-violence, Albert Schweitzer, a Christian theologian, organist, philosopher, physician, and medical missionary, developed his doctrine of reverence for life, for which he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1952. He considered this principle both a universal frame of ethics for our times and an evolutionary imperative. Simply stated, the principle of reverence for life finds its expression in unconditionally respecting the wish of other beings to exist as one does towards oneself. Schweitzer strove hard to put this principle into practice in his own personal life as well as in his work as a medical missionary in Central Africa. Schweitzer acknowledged that in nature, one form of life must always prey upon another. However, he believed that a self-aware, ethical human being respects the will of other beings to live and endeavors hard to minimize the unavoidable harm as far as possible. Standing, as all living beings are, before the dilemma of the will to live, a person is constantly forced to preserve his own life and life in general only at the cost of other life. If he has been touched by the ethic of reverence for life, he injures and destroys life only under a necessity he cannot avoid, and never from thoughtlessness. Making a difference, one fish at a time. Any change at a personal or social level requires commitment, hard work, and patience. Sometimes we feel disheartened in wake of the enormity of the undertaking. We feel overwhelmed. We start entertaining thoughts such as, "What difference does it make? I'm just one person." The following story illustrates the point that when we choose to follow the right course of action, it does make a difference. Once upon a time, there was a wise man who used to go to the ocean to do his writing. He had a habit of walking on the beach before he began his work. One day, as he was walking along the shore, he looked down the beach and saw a human figure moving like a dancer. He smiled to himself at the thought of someone who would dance to the day, and so he walked faster to catch up. As he got closer, he noticed that the figure was that of a young man, and that what he was doing was not dancing at all. The young man was reaching down to the shore, picking up small objects and throwing them into the ocean. He came closer still and called out, "Good morning. May I ask what it is that you're doing?" The young man paused, looked up, and replied, "Throwing starfish into the ocean." The somewhat startled wise man asked, Then I must ask, why are you throwing the starfish into the ocean?" To this, the young man replied, "The sun is up and the tide is going out. If I don't throw them in, they'll die." Upon hearing this, the wise man commented, "But young man, do you not realize that there are miles and miles of beach, and there are starfish all along every mile? You can't possibly make a difference." At this, the young man bent down, picked up yet another starfish, and threw it into the ocean. As it met the water, he said, "It made a difference for that one." Help ever, hurt never. The great Indian epic Mahabharata contains 100,000 verses and is considered to be the world's longest epic poem. It is more than 7 times the combined size of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Its claim to greatness, however, does not rest only on its quantity but also in the quality of its message. It has been rightly said, "What is found in Mahabharata one may find elsewhere in other works, but what is not found in it will not be found in any other book at all." The great English critic A.R. Orage felt that there were absolute truths embodied in the Mahabharata. Orage considered it to be the greatest book ever written and a touchstone of literary style and quality. The Bhagavad Gita, the world's loftiest spiritual poem, forms a part of this epic. The legendary author of this epic, Ved Vyasa, presents all conceivable human tendencies in the form of certain characters. When someone asked him to select the most important single verse that represented the essence of his work, he is reported to have stated, "The gist of 1,000,000 treatises is expressed in half a verse. The highest merit is helping others. The highest wrongdoing is hurting others." It is important to reflect why the learned author of this great work singled out hurting others as the highest possible spiritual demerit. In order to understand the depth of this observation, we have to dig further into the truth of our existence. Consider the following illustration. At its most basic level, all existence, from a piece of rock to a most developed specimen of living beings, is composed of 5 fundamental elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space. Each of these elements within our body, for example, exists with reference to the totality of its corresponding element outside our body. Take, for example, the element of air. The air that we breathe in exists by virtue of its relationship and interaction with the totality of air that exists outside in the environment. Likewise, the water that exists in our body in the form of various liquids cannot exist without the totality of water that exists outside. The same is true of the remaining elements. They exist in the microcosm of our body by virtue of the relationship with the totality of these elements in the macrocosm. So far, so good. If this is true regarding these physical elements, how much more so the consciousness that is the fundamental building block of all existence? This short excursion into the interconnected nature of reality perhaps provides the simplest compelling reason yet to understand the oneness of the whole of existence. In our human terms, it means that we are inseparably one with the rest of existence. So, in effect, to hurt others is to hurt ourselves. That is why sages of humanity have always insisted on helping others, because they understood that essentially there are no others, and all life is inseparably interlinked and interconnected. Why is this simple existential fact not obvious to everyone? Why are we not naturally able to sense it and warm up to this view of reality? Perhaps, in the perennial fight for self-preservation, this type of thinking does not further any evolutionary agenda. Perhaps, by some sort of optical illusion, we are not able to see beyond the facade of self-centered, separately existing objects, vying for their survival and flourishing. This leads to self-defeating strategies that disempower at best and seriously impinge upon the mutual preservation of everyone's interest, the mutual maintenance of the universe. Albert Einstein captures the issue succinctly and suggests a solution to come out of this prison of separateness as follows. A human being is part of a whole called universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. David Bohm, Einstein's colleague and successor at Princeton, believed that the quantum theory reveals the unbroken wholeness of the universe. According to Bohm, this is the natural state of the human world, separation without separateness. However, we continue to delight in differences and fail to see what is essentially the same in all of us. It is abundantly evident that the divisions of race, religion, color, creed, and culture have contributed to the most heinous horrors of humankind. This will continue unabated, as history testifies, until we see the tyranny of our disempowering stance. Let's seek and share the underlying truth of mutuality that does not lead to unnatural differences and disharmony. That is the truth of our identity behind diversity, the essential oneness of all that exists. By seeking the truth that is equally good to all, we will be able to revere all life and truly redeem our human existence. Only then can we ensure equally the happiness and welfare of all beings. That will be our true gift of harmlessness to the universe. Harmlessness and vegetarianism. Ahimsa is the basis for the vegetarianism within Hinduism and Buddhism, though it goes well beyond just being vegetarian. This core principle is derived from the Vedic injunction, Ma himsayat sarva bhutani. Do no harm to living creatures. This recommendation is also repeated to the seeker after truth in the Upanishads. According to the Chandogya Upanishad, if the food is pure, the mind becomes pure. If the mind is pure, memory becomes firm. When memory becomes strong, one is released from all knots of the heart and liberation is attained. The perspective of a Buddhist in China. When a scholar named Cho Yu was cooking some eel to eat, he noticed one of the eels bending in its body such that its head and tail were still in the boiling point liquid, but its body arched upward above the soup. It did not fall completely in until finally dying. Cho Yu found the occurrence a strange one, pulled out the eel and cut it open. He found thousands of eggs inside. The eel had arched its belly out of the hot soup to protect its offspring. He cried at the sight, sighed with emotion, and swore never to eat meat. According to the Hindu Vedic tradition, all creatures form the limbs of a single, all-pervading divine being. To benefit one limb is to benefit the divine being, and to harm one limb is to harm the integrity of the divine being. Therefore, all of our actions should be performed for the welfare of all beings. All the great spiritual traditions of India, drawing upon this root idea, dictate that a spiritual aspirant must abstain as much as possible from causing any harm to any living being. However, at the same time, it was recognized that life inherently involves harm of some form or another. As a Vedic verse puts it, life lives by living off of another life. Jivo jivan jivati. It is true that vegetarians too cause harm by killing plants or using animals to plow the fields. One may also inadvertently harm other beings in the process of raising crops. However, this seems minimal compared to the routine cruelty that is involved in raising, transporting, and slaughtering animals for food. It is true that no one in reality can have a completely harmless existence. But that does not mean that we should abandon the core value of harmlessness. We must minimize the harm we cause to other creatures as far as possible. Clearly, no one is arguing that Eskimos and others who have no other means of sustenance should adopt a vegetarian diet. However, abstaining from eating meat is possible for nearly all of us, given the choices that the modern life accords. And in the process of adopting our vegetarian diets, we may atone for some harm we might have caused inadvertently in the process of adopting a vegetarian diet. The great scientist Albert Einstein has reported to have declared vegetarianism to be the only viable solution for the sustainable way of living on this planet. Likewise, Gandhi observed, "I do feel that spiritual progress does demand at some stage that we should cease to kill our fellow creatures for the satisfaction of our bodily wants." It is well beyond the scope of this work to recount the health hazards of eating meat. They are very well documented in the current scholarly and popular literature on health and nutrition. In the final reckoning, it all depends upon our personal beliefs and choices. These choices, being habit-driven, are not always easy to change, even if one is willing. "The spirit is willing," says the Bible, "but the flesh is weak." Observation and reflection make it clear that, as human beings, we are not the most rational creatures when it comes to forming our beliefs and making our choices. If life were rational, everyone would quit smoking. For some, the decision to become vegetarian happens instantly. They read some study on the risks of eating meat or watch documentary footage of a factory farm, and meat is off their menu for good. For others, the decision may come in fits and spurts. We can choose to become vegetarian as a healthy decision, both for ourselves and for the environment. We can also choose not to eat meat, guided by the pure motivation of harmlessness, by becoming vegetarian out of kindness and compassion, preventing the suffering of living creatures to satisfy our taste buds and appetite is the minimal expression of compassion we all can offer. The choice is always ours. Harmlessness in a Darwinian world. The reader must be wondering if it is really possible to practice harmlessness in this dog-eat-dog world. People often argue that harmlessness can be perceived as a weak stance, and one can be taken advantage of as a result. As the following parable states, harmlessness should be practiced with tactful diligence so as to deter manipulative people who would walk all over you. A parable of a snake and a holy man. There was once a holy man who came to a village. The villagers warned him that he must not go on a certain path because a venomous snake that had killed many people always lay there. "It won't hurt me," said the holy man, and continued on his way. Sure enough, the snake approached, reared its head, hissing and ready to strike. But when it saw the holy man, it prostrated itself humbly at his feet. The sage taught it to give up the idea of biting and killing. Soon the boys of the village discovered the change in the character of the snake. Knowing that it was now harmless, they would attack it with sticks and stones whenever it came out of its hole. But the snake would. When the holy man came to that village next, he went to the snake's hole and called it. Hearing its teacher's voice, the snake came squirming out, crippled from the blows it had received from the village boys. The holy man questioned it about the reason for its condition. "Revered sir, you asked me not to bite or kill anyone." The sage replied, "I told you not to bite." This story is an excellent answer to the objection that meekness and humility have no place in this Darwinian world. By pointing out the difference between biting and hissing, the story illustrates that it is still possible to practice kindness and meekness wisely. Accordingly, harmlessness should not be allowed to become a position for the unwise to take advantage of. It must be practiced with tactful awareness. Harmlessness and fulfillment. What is the relationship between harmlessness and fulfillment? Why should one who is seeking fulfillment practice harmlessness? The simplest and the most obvious answer to this question is based on the understanding that it is hard for someone to experience lasting joy while engaged in causing harm to others rampantly. As indicated above, harmlessness is related to the doctrine of karma. This principle teaches us that what goes around comes around. When we treat the universe in a non-harming way, the universe in turn treats us accordingly. A Chinese proverb puts it this way: "A little perfume stays with the hand that gives flowers to others." The converse is true as well for the hand that carries thorns for others. However, for a person seeking fulfillment, karma may not even be the most compelling reason for practicing harmlessness. In fact, the real reasons for practicing harmlessness are kindness and compassion. This compassion is born with our deep understanding about the unity of the web of life. When one has understood the underlying oneness of all existence, when one has realized that the harm done to others is really the harm brought upon oneself, then harmlessness becomes a most natural expression of our innate kindness and compassion. It then leads to purity of mind that can finally help us realize the highest truth about ourselves, the final goal of our finite existence. In his autobiography, Gandhi similarly states that the only means for the realization of truth is ahimsa, a tale of universal pity. The legend of the Muslim saints abounds in tales of pity shown to animals, birds, and even insects. It is related that Bayezid, concluding remarks, "So, who are we in essence truly? When one considers oneself as a human being, one develops kinship with all the human beings regardless of their color, race, religion, and culture. And when one realizes oneself to be a sentient being, one develops one's kinship with the whole of existence, with all creation. In fact, there are no others. All are I or we. With this realization, one is able to offer the greatest possible gift to all existence, the gift of complete harmlessness. Ultimately, harmlessness is about making peace with all that exists. And when we make peace with all creation, we make this world a better place to live in, just by being in it. In sum, the practice of harmlessness arises out of a deep understanding of the oneness and the unity of life. Living is not just about me, but about everything that exists. The purpose of this understanding of oneness is therefore highly practical. To live a life of harmlessness, born of the understanding of oneness, of all existence, remaining ever established in the realization of one's identity with the highest unitive principle in the universe. Just imagine how different things would be if a few members of a community took a vow of harmlessness. Just imagine how different our workplaces would be if a small fraction of their members decided to live by the principle of harmlessness. And just imagine how much peace we could foster if we could elevate this gift to a macro level. Our planet is plagued by mindless exploitation and rampant destruction, dogged self-centeredness, and unbridled greed that has manifested in terrorism, war, and violence. If there is one thing that can save our species from the mad self-destruction of war and violence, it is the gift of harmlessness.